So as is usual on Palm Sunday, we hear the narrative by different voices around the building, different characters. And today's reading is from the Gospel of Matthew. So could I ask that our people get into position, please? You want to stand there, Laura? John?
They took Jesus when we were at a place called Gethsemane. I'd never seen him so troubled, so full of grief. He went a small distance away from us and fell face down on the ground, as if he were begging God to release him from his terrible sorrow. We were supposed to be keeping watch with him. He wanted us to stay with him while he prayed. I wish to heaven now that I had been a little stronger, but although my heart was heavy, so were my eyelids. I couldn't stay awake. 3 times he woke us. 3 times he asked us to stay awake and watch with him. Each time his face showing deeper sorrow. Each time I told myself that I would be stronger, that he needed us to stay awake, that I loved him too much to let him bear this trouble alone. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Then, after he woke us up the 3rd time, the garden filled with people.
I had arranged a signal with the chief priests that the man I greeted with a kiss would be the man they had come to arrest. So as soon as I saw Jesus, I went up to him and I kissed him. And he let me. He knew I had betrayed him, but still he looked at me with love in his eyes, forgiving me, even as I broke his heart. They stepped forward and seized him. Peter reacted without thinking as usual, and struck out with his sword, cutting off the ear of the servant of the high priest. I thought all hell was about to break loose. Then Jesus stepped forward and told Peter to put his sword away. He touched the servant where he was bleeding, and his ear was healed. He gave himself up to them. All who draw the sword will die by the sword. So much for our Saviour, our Messiah, our leader. This man we had hoped would free us was led away like a sheep. All who draw the sword will die by the sword. When the other disciples saw that they had lost, they ran for their lives. His friends, his followers, the people who had once been prepared to do anything for him, all of them ran away. And I ran with them.
I was terrified, but I had to see what would happen. I couldn't believe that it was all over, so I followed them right up to the courtyard of the high priest in the Sanhedrin and sat with the guards. One by one, I watched false witnesses give evidence against him. My fear was the only thing stopping me from angrily shouting out the truth, but they couldn't pin anything on him, try as they might, until 2 people came forward and said that Jesus had declared that he would destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. After that, they asked him outright to tell them if he was the Son of God, and he calmly answered that he was. The high priest declared him a blasphemer, and suddenly crowds were baying for his blood, demanding that he be killed, and they started spitting on him, hitting him, slapping him, and taunting him, telling him to prophesy who had hit him. I couldn't watch anymore.
He was an innocent man. He knew that. I knew it, and that he only had to answer my questions to save his own life. He must have realized the danger he was in. He had already been beaten around a bit at the Sanhedrin by the looks of things, and he knew why they would have needed to bring him to me. I couldn't help but admire his nerve. He stood there calmly, listening to the charges that they brought against him. He wouldn't deny them. He just stood and listened. But I thought that I could still help him. I hadn't yet released a prisoner to them, as is my custom at Passover. And I thought I could release him, release to the Jews their king. To make it easier, I made sure they couldn't possibly make any other choice. I offered them the life of Jesus, or that of a murderer, a notorious criminal who the public had been glad to see caught and locked up ready for execution. Jesus or Barabbas. It was hardly a choice. And yet, when it came to it...
I was sitting in the courtyard outside the Sanhedrin, my whole world collapsing around me, terrified for my life, but too full of grief to know what to do next. When a servant girl recognized me as one of Jesus' friends, I quickly denied it. The crowds wanted blood, and I wasn't going to let them have any of mine. I left as quickly as possible. But on my way out, another girl saw me and started telling the people there that I was with Jesus. I swore at her, saying, I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know the man. Later, still more people came up to me. They had heard my accent. They said it gave me away. I was only thinking of my own life. I didn't want to be taken away too. So I called down curses on myself and swore to them that I didn't know Jesus. At that moment, a cock crowed. I remember Jesus' words to me earlier. Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. He was right. When it came to it, I couldn't stand up for him any more than I could stay awake for him. I betrayed my friend and left him to die alone.
Even then, I could have saved him. As I listened to the crowds calling for him to be crucified, even then I could have stepped in. I could see that he was innocent of any crime. My wife had seen it also in a dream and had told me I mustn't have anything to do with his death. My wife had seen it also in a dream and had told me I mustn't have anything to do with his death. I could have stopped it. But I have my responsibilities to think about, my position. I'm supposed to control the people I govern. And sometimes to do that, they must be given what they want. If I had made any other decision, it could have sparked a rebellion. I made it clear that I disapproved of their judgment, that I knew him to be an innocent man. I washed my hands in front of them. They took the blame themselves. They said the blood will be on their hands. That's what they said. But I could have saved him.
There was something different about him, even his crime. King of the Jews. What kind of crime is that? Didn't stop us from mocking him, though. We put a scarlet robe on him, put a staff in his hands, and when we hailed him, like he was really a king, seemed kind of funny at the time. Some of the others made a crown out of thorns and put it on his head. I thought that was going a bit far, but it's easy to get carried away. We see so many executions, so much violence. What's a bit more blood? Only somehow it stopped being funny. We all felt it as we spat at him and hit him. There was something about the way he stood there, clearly in pain, clearly distressed. As the blood ran into his eyes, he was hit over the head with that big staff. There was something about the way he just accepted it. It wasn't resignation, but he wasn't angry or malicious either. He just accepted it. Yeah, there was something different about him.
He was obviously in a bad way. He'd been horribly beaten. He'd been flogged, and he had thorns on his head in a sort of a mock crown. They had done everything they could to humiliate him, made an example of him. I suppose they succeeded in a way. I was standing at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was having trouble walking and collapsed. And it was the guards that spotted me in the crowd, so they made me help him. And I felt how heavy the cross was. I was surprised he'd got that far by himself. The state he was in. So I took one end of it and walked the rest of the way to Golgotha. They crucified him, hammering nails into his hands. We've all seen it before, but somehow this was even worse than usual. There was something about the pain in his face, as though it wasn't only caused by what was being done to his body. It was as if he had the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. So much suffering on his face.
While he was hanging there, we cast lots for his clothes and waited for him to die, because that's what we always did. But like I said, there was something different about this one.
As chief priest, I want to see his justly deserved punishment with the other chief priests and teachers of the law. The charge above his head said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." We asked for it to be removed, insulting as it was to our people and our religion. But they refused, and there it stayed, a reminder of the blasphemy he committed. The man who had claimed he could destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, who said that he was the Son of God. There he hung, reduced to one of many criminals dying in pathetic ignominy. He saved others, but he couldn't save himself. All he had to do was come down from the cross, and we would all have believed in him. How? He said he was the Son of God, but God didn't seem to want to rescue him.
Then at the 6th hour, an unnatural darkness came over the land. And at the 9th hour, Jesus called out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me? He was calling Elijah, but Elijah didn't save him. And with one terrible cry, Jesus died.
That moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom.
The earth shook and the rocks split.
The tombs broke open, and the dead bodies there were raised to life.
It was only then that I realised, surely this man, the man he had mocked, spat on and crucified, surely he was the Son of God.